Welcome to the Daily Objective. It is October 15th, which is, as many of you know, Dr. Leonard Peikoff's birthday. It is his 90th birthday. Uh, Longtime viewers of the channel will have seen us celebrate Peikoff's birthday in previous years in different ways. A couple of those years we had Dr. Peikoff himself on the channel on his birthday. We'll hopefully have him again on the channel on future birthdays, and not just birthdays. But yeah, today we are continuing as we have been for the past 9 days with coverage of the war in Israel and nothing else. So the way we were going to do today's episode is we are going to discuss some of Dr. Peikoff's views and statements in the past about how to deal with Islamic terrorism in particular. Yeah, we're going to go through some of that. We're going to discuss what would have happened maybe if the world had listened to Dr. Peikoff. But as always with these episodes, I am going to start with our news update of sorts for people who would rather get their news from us than from people who from media outlets that give you both sides, the sides of the victims and the sides of the perpetrators.
May I just say, Razi, having endured, having gone through Western media and last few couple of days, I deeply appreciate this. It takes intestinal fortitude of a kind that I cannot sustain when I hear the despicable defenses and appeasement of the most horrific violence that you can imagine. So thank you, Razi, for this and your whole approach. And as someone who's known Dr. Peikoff for now 40 years, this year will mark my 40th anniversary in being someone who personally knows and studies me, my teacher, my mentor, proud to call him a friend for now 40 years. And I think he would be very proud, Razi, of your leadership of the Ayn Rand Center UK, and in fact, your entire approach. I just want to say thank you. And I know that Dr. Peikoff would be deeply appreciative of what you're doing and how you're doing it.
I appreciate that, James. I also appreciate we've gotten comments and I've gotten messages thanking us, and people actually telling us that they are getting their news from us. And I understand it from what little I've consumed of the media. I was talking to a friend earlier, and she asked, do you think they shouldn't interview Palestinians? And I was kind of thinking on the spot. I mean, certainly wouldn't interview Hamas people. I was thinking, if you take any of these crimes that they've committed and just treat them as individual crimes, like if somebody just raped a woman and they were reporting that and the woman wanted to come forward, would you interview the woman and the rapist and then say, well, let's look at both sides? We're fair and balanced. I think that's a Fox News slogan. Don't sue me. I'm just using it as an expression. Yeah, would you want both sides? I think moral clarity is important here. Being neutral and being objective is not the same. And I'll also, just on a personal note, I'll say I have seen a few. I try not to engage. Sometimes I can't hold back. But I've seen a few comments on Twitter. People commenting, kind of debating me on some of this. I don't want to debate this topic, even if I can't hold back. And sometimes I reply, if you think there's any sort of moral equivalence here, go debate somebody who's willing to talk to you. I'm not. There are many topics I'm happy to debate. This is not one of them. So yeah. All right. So news update. So there were at least 6 incidents today of rockets being fired at Israel from Lebanon, from the north by Hezbollah. One person died in Israel from one of those rockets. Israel did some surgical strikes, but there was also a statement by the Israeli defense minister saying to Hezbollah something to the effect of, if you stand down, we will respect that, which of course is something that I strongly disagree with. I think I said on the first or second of these shows maybe the second show that we did, that Israel should strike first. And again, that is no longer the option because Hezbollah has already struck and is striking daily. But every day that passes, every minute that passes, Israel is showing weakness in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, in the north against Hezbollah, and is emboldening Israel's enemies and the enemies of the West. So I think action needs to be taken, needs to be decisive, it needs to be taken sooner rather than later, and it's already late. So
we already have Iran saying that if Israel defends itself in Gaza, that they're going to, they've in effect declared war, and there's more attacks coming. So we know where this is coming from. Iran has already stated they're not, everyone knows they're the supporters of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah are merely the puppet agents of the evil regime in Tehran. And Tehran has already said Israel has no right to defend itself, and they are going to war if Israel should do anything to defend itself in Gaza.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we've said here that Israel should defend itself, obviously in Gaza, also in Lebanon, and also against Iran. This was an attack by Iran. Iran is clearly a target. I mentioned when I was talking to Dr. Benswanger, there was an excuse after 9/11 that technically it wasn't Iran. Iran wasn't behind the attacks. That's why we can't target them. Well, Iran was behind the attacks here, and they are not just a legitimate, but a necessary target. And speaking of Iran, yesterday there was a summit, a meeting in Qatar between Hamas leadership and the foreign minister of Iran. So Iran is not pretending. It's not one of those situations where you kind of secretly finance it and send it through whatever 100 bank accounts or whatever, so they don't know where it's coming from. Iran is proudly behind this attack, and the response should be proudly against Iran as well.
Proudly against. It must be. It must be. They are the direct killers here. They kill Iran, not just Hamas, not just Hezbollah. Iran killed Israelis and Americans last weekend. That's the way we have to look at it. There's no other way to look at it. They are ultimately the greater enemy. If you imagine, in fact, one of the analogies Dr. Peikoff draws in his great speech, End States, his great, it was actually originally a full-page ad he bought in the New York Times in the wake of 9/11. He used his own money to buy the ad space so that this essay could be published for the first time. One of the great points he makes there, imagine this, we're fighting the Nazis, some Nazi satellite regime is doing the attacking, and someone says, oh no, it's only the satellite regime that we attack. We don't go after the Nazi government itself, merely the proxy or the agent for the Nazis. No one would be fooled into that kind of, no one would even think that would be an effective defense. You are not being effective in your defense if you're only going after that immediate agent of the ultimate bad guy. The real enemy here, as I have stressed again and again, and I will keep stressing until my voice is left my body, Iran is the Hydra here. You can cut off a head, and I don't care what organization it is, another head will spring up. The fountainhead, if I can use that beautiful term in a perverse way, the fountainhead of all of this violence and evil over the last 20 years plus has been Iran. They have been funding Hezbollah, Hamas, other terrorist organizations on both ends of the Muslim religious spectrum. And since we have been appeasing the United States in particular, since the 1950s, since the 1970s, since the 1990s, again and again and again, America has been appeasing Iran, and the bodies of dead babies from last weekend is the direct fruit of that appeasement. It's nothing short of that.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of the different heads here, another, the rockets continue from Gaza as well, not just from Lebanon. There have been many rockets fired on many towns and cities in Israel, including Tel Aviv. So they do go quite far north. There was one incident of suspected terrorists invading in the south of Israel in the town of Ofakim, which is not far from Gaza. There have been reports like this on a pretty much daily basis in recent days. It's very likely that of the thousands of terrorists who invaded Israel, Some are still alive and still somewhere around. It's likely that there are still terrorists who can invade in some way. You know, this was done on the ground and from the air and from the sea, but Gaza is very much, and especially the terrorist activity there, is very much underground. There's a whole underground network there that is, you know, where Hamas lives, where they hide, where they move weapons and whatever it is they move, and some of those tunnels presumably can reach into Israel. So we don't know what is coming from there. And just another update is there were also rockets fired I think yesterday from Syria, which is that is somewhat unusual. That's a generally quiet border. Israel bombs Syria from time to time. I mean, not just in the past 9 days, but you know, when there's a reason they bomb. Well, I think there's always a reason, but when they think there's a reason. So the airport in Aleppo was bombed by Israel yesterday for the second time in 3 days. They bombed it, then they fixed it, and then they bombed it again. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for the news update for today.
Think about that. Hundreds of meters, hundreds of miles, depending on which you use, but hundreds of miles or meters of tunnels have been being built. Now, one of the real terrible upshots of the appeasement, just handing over Gaza to Hamas's rule for many years, has been that they've had plenty of time to prepare for this moment. They've had plenty of time to fortify underground facilities, to build hundreds of miles of tunnels under there, some of which can reach into Israel. And that has itself, the very existence of these dangerous tunnels, is itself the product of years of Israeli and American appeasement of Hamas. I just want to emphasize that as well.
Yeah, and it's not just that. Maybe I should have mentioned this in the news update. There was this 24-hour warning that Israel gave the residents of the northern third or so of the Gaza Strip to leave. Now that deadline has passed more than 24 hours ago, and I saw today a news bulletin about the IDF, one of the IDF spokespersons saying that we've been more than generous with this time that we've given. I mean, I think it's generous to even give them the option, but it's certainly been more than generous.
More than generous is a good description, yeah. Foolish.
But
I think it's more like it.
He added that an operation, actually, let me look at the exact wording of it so that I don't screw this up, because it was pretty bad the way I thought. Yeah, we'll start significant operations when they leave, which is absolutely shocking. Because
so how many terrorists get to leave? How many terrorist leaders get to leave? How many organizers of this horror get to go shelter themselves, hide among civilians? I mean, it's disgusting, disgusting.
And the people Israel should be after are the ones who are going to use this warning as an opportunity to leave or to plan for Israeli soldiers coming in. The citizens, the residents of Gaza who are trying to flee are not allowed to. And there was a video and an image that I retweeted. If you're following me on Twitter at Razi Ginsburg, you can find those, but you can find those elsewhere. There's there's plenty of evidence of the people of Hamas operatives blocking the roads, bombing in one case a road when Palestinians are trying to flee, because they have an interest in as many people dying on the Palestinian side as possible, because the useful idiots in the West will then say, look, Israel is killing innocents on the Palestinian side.
Hamas is murdering their own people. Hamas is murdering Palestinians. Not only did they tell, at first when the warning came out, they said, stay, don't flee. Now they're physically preventing them. They're bombing roads. They're fencing people in. They're having military people forcing people to stay in their homes. This is incredible. You know that this defense Israel has to do is coming, and you're forcing your own civilians, your own women and children, to remain where you know the bombs must fall. We have said it before, and I will say it again until I'm out of breath. The aggressor is always responsible for the civilian casualties. In this case, it is monstrously so. They're being chained, in effect. They're being chained, in effect, to where the bombs must fall, and they know they must fall. Hamas, not Israel, Hamas is responsible for, and 10 times more responsible than normal aggressors are, for every single Palestinian civilian who dies. We've discussed the degrees of innocence, even whether they're, most adults in the area are even innocent. I mean, they've been living in this country that has been lobbing rockets to Israel year after year after year. They know what Hamas's ideology is, and yet they're still there. Now, I can understand people desiring to flee. They know bombs are coming, but consider it. Either you're so warped. I listened to as I say, I had the stomach to try and watch some of these the interviews with some of these celebrators of the violence. And you got two kinds. You got the one kind that says, I don't believe it. This is all, no babies were executed. This is all just a conspiracy. Now, never mind that the videos taken by the terrorists themselves are available. Never mind that international observers have seen the bodies. The Red Cross could confirm this for you. International news agencies from across the political spectrum can confirm these atrocities to you. And yet there's a group of people out there who say it's all a giant Israeli conspiracy, Mossad or something, faked all this. Or you've got the people, which is worse, mind you, the degree of mental evasion, which in my mind is immoral on this point. They're not innocents if they believe that. They're engaged in huge mental evasion. Or take the other kind of mental evasion. The people who say, oh yeah, okay, they did decapitate babies, they did burn children alive, but it was justified. It was justified. There are people out there saying it was. Now, which kind of mental warping is worse? Which kind of psychoepistemological corruption is worse in your mind? But neither are necessarily honest. The fact that people are confused, have bad ideas about that does not make these innocent civilians. They are evading on a massive scale, one way or another.
Yeah, we'll talk later this week, I'm sure, maybe even tomorrow, on one of our shows about the demonstrations, protests, as they're called, celebrations, as I call them, in the streets of particularly London, which is terrifying to me personally, of people out there protesting. But one image I saw was of people with these. They taped like these cartoons to their back of paragliders. Now, again, paragliders in this context is only murderers and rapists. Like, that is what these paragliders are. That is what they went in there for. So you're not protesting in favor of the occupation ending and the people of Gaza, living better and ending a humanitarian crisis. You're protesting in favor of murder and rape. That is what you're doing when you have an image of a paraglider as part of your protest.
They are celebrating a surprise attack on civilians. And they tell Israel, you got to obey every one of the Geneva Convention rules. Well, wait a minute here. Every damn Geneva Convention was just destroyed and flouted last weekend by these Hamas monsters who had absolutely no respect for civilians. You're absolutely right. Here they are mowing down innocent young people at a peaceful event, civilians on purpose, raping them next to the dead bodies of their friends. I mean, can you imagine anything more horrific? And that's what they're celebrating. Now, how do you get your mind into that kind of a twisted position? Let me suggest you'd have to evade on a massive scale, on a scale that is no longer morally neutral in this context. You have all the information available you need. And whatever kind of evasion you are on this, it is not honest. And those people are not what I would call, quote, innocent civilians at all.
Yeah. Before we get to Dr. Peikoff's some of his statements in the past, especially as you mentioned after 9/11, which is it rings true today, 22 years later, and I think he's been proven right. I do want to get to the few super chats that we have. So Frank says, "Is this operation sort of like the siege of Vicksburg?"
No, I wouldn't compare this to us. Well, moral, there could be tactical comparisons, but the moral comparison, if only Israel had the same, and America, frankly, had the same moral conviction that they were fighting slave society. Unfortunately, we don't have the kind of moral clarity that once upon a time existed. Now, tactically, is it like that? There are comparisons to be made, I think, but thank you for the question in the super chat. But I think the big difference is the moral clarity that the good guys brought to it, at least at a certain point in that conflict. We could use a little of that moral clarity here. We need more General Sherman cutting his way across the South than we in this context than we do confusion.
Always good to have a historian on the show when we are asked questions about history that I don't know the answer to. Vladimir sends a super chat as well. Thank you for that. Duncan with a very generous $50 super chat says, "I stand with Israel and I stand with ARCUK." We thank you for that, and we will now get to Dr. Peikoff. So in the essay "End States That Sponsor Terrorism," this was originally this was a full page ad originally, right? And then it in the New York Times, and this was early October, right? Am I correct?
Yes, about a month after the events of 9/11, 2001 took place, this appeared as a full page ad in the New York Times. Dr. Peikoff later reposted it on his own website and podcast pages. It was then reprinted thereafter by the Ayn Rand Institute. But originally it was a New York Times ad that Dr. Peikoff actually bought to get his ideas out there. And boy, are you absolutely right. If his warning had been heeded, those babies would be alive today. I don't mean to engage in hyperbole or exaggeration, because there is not one micron of exaggeration here. If over 20 years ago we had heeded this call to take out the government in Iran, think of how we might have spared. Think of all the lives. Think of all the rockets that have been lobbed by Hamas and Hezbollah since then. Think of all the terrorism that Iran has sponsored since then. But just think of this one incident last weekend, all those babies dead that might be alive right now had Dr. Peikoff's prophetic warning. Now, it's not mystically prophetic, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone with eyes applying a rational epistemology to recent history could have and should have seen that Dr. Peikoff was correct. I did. Most of my friends did. We could see, and he takes us through the history of it. He's talking about history. Back in the early 1950s, the United States, which was responsible for the development of petroleum as a resource in the Middle East, it is American oil companies that built the facilities, these Islamic savages really are savages. And it really does take freedom and capitalism and reason to build a civilization and to create wealth. And that takes technology, that takes science, that takes reason, that takes a free mind. And so, as usual, these dictatorships, and boy, you can do it over and over again, right? With communism and socialism and Nazism, it's support from the West, the comparatively free West, which pumps them up and supplies them and sanctions them before the violence and the attack comes from them. So we're the creators. The evil can exist only as a parasite. It is not productive. It does not create values. Whatever wealth it has, and notice, even as America comes in and builds the petroleum resources, we find the oil, we dig it up from the ground, we refine it, and not only that, we're the only ones who have use for it. It's not as though these countries are big industrial countries who need to power an industrial civilization with oil. No, 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 no. We're the ones who give them the customers, the facilities, the technology. And in the 1950s, all of this was nationalized, starting in Iran, by the way, nationalizing US-built oil facilities. And what did America do? What did Presidents Truman and Eisenhower do? Nothing. We don't want to aggravate anything. We're just being economic imperialists. Let them have the facilities. And what does it do? It gives these savages a source of wealth that they would otherwise never have had. Never have had. But the wealth itself was created by Western capitalist companies. And when that was stolen from us, what does it signal? What does it signal to the whole world? And then watch as history unfolds in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, so I want to get to a couple of paragraphs. So by the way, they're kind of out of context, so I think they speak for themselves. But I do encourage people to read it. Daniel, if you can put the link to the full article on ARI's website in the live chat. And again, I encourage everybody to read that. And it's good to have you, James, on this show with me discussing it, because you studied under Dr. Peikoff for many years. You host Keeping It Real here on Wednesdays, which, like all our shows, other than the Daily Objective and the reality show, is now on hiatus, but it is, it is coming back. And you also host the members only discussions on Peikoff's courses on Sundays, which you've been doing for years. So yeah, if anybody should be discussing Dr. Peikoff's work, it is you. So let me read. So this is a paragraph from that article. The Muslim countries embodied in an extreme form every idea: selfless duty, anti-materialism, faith or feeling above science, the supremacy of the group, which our universities, our churches, and our own political establishment had long been upholding as virtue. When two groups, our leadership and theirs, accept the same basic ideas, the most consistent side wins. And I think in the context of, I'm thinking of this in the context of Israel. Israel very much prides itself. The Israelis like to say that the IDF is the most moral army in the world, and it's not the most moral because of the enemy they're fighting or because of who they're defending. It's the most moral because they go out of their way more than any other army to prevent civilian casualties on the enemy's side. And of course, the enemy does the exact opposite. They go out of the way to ensure civilian casualties on their side because they know how the IDF fights. So Hamas goes out of their way to make sure that civilians in Gaza die. And this is the moral view. This is the Israel certainly is the most altruistic military in the world. The IDF is. So yeah, how would you assess that? Yeah, go ahead.
Perverse. It's upside down. The most moral army in the world is the one that decisively and completely annihilates the enemy, not one that sanctions and allows the enemy to continue to fight the next day. And that is exactly how the West has hobbled themselves. Israel and America both have this altruistic standard that says, oh, we'll take on our soldiers. We'd rather have our soldiers die than so-called innocent civilians on the other side. This is to fall prey to the enemy's tactics. This is to become an agent, in effect, of the enemy's strategy. If we, for 1 minute, say that a single one of these Palestinian civilians is the responsibility of an Israeli attack, and that's what Israel's accepting, aren't they? They're implicitly accepting this notion that in defending themselves, they are guilty for the deaths that inevitably must result. They are not. They're innocent of it. And in fact, the only moral way is to wipe out as many enemies as quickly as possible to prevent it from happening and prevent it from ever happening again. So it's exactly backwards. The most moral army would be the most decisive, clearest, quickest victory. And if that means wiping out more of the enemy, and of course it means putting your soldiers' lives, treating them as now, human lives are human lives. We all know that. But wait, ladies and gentlemen, when force is used, the aggressors lose their rights. They lose their right to be treated like human beings. They lose their right. So to treat an Israeli soldier's life as lesser to, or even equal than, the civilians on the other side is an immoral approach. So what they boast as being the basis for their morality, and Americans make the same sorts of boasts. Oh, we care about civilian casualties. We want to limit. That's the way. George W. Bush, in the wake of 9/11, madness that he was engaging in a proxy war. Another thing Peikoff complains about there, that we didn't go in and destroy Al Qaeda ourselves is bad enough. We did it through proxies, and of course, Al Qaeda escaped, and Bin Laden escaped to Tora Bora, notoriously, as everyone knows. Even that, though, is a comparative sideshow, as he observes, to Tehran. But even that we didn't do properly. We shackle ourselves with altruism, saying that we would rather die ourselves than have unnecessary deaths on the other side that the enemy would be responsible for. In the current situation, it is all the clearer, as we've pointed out. I mean, you've got Hamas keeping their civilians there where they know the bombs must fall. These people are murdering their own, and that's the way we have to treat it. In fact, if we were to go all out, flatten Gaza City, or frankly, go all out and flatten Tehran, every single one of those deaths would be the fault of the aggressors here, and not us, period. And the minute you allow that in, the minute you suggest that you're somehow morally bad for defending yourself, that you're morally wrong because you're killing someone that you had to kill in order to stop the violence, you've accepted this altruist, Christian, Kantian, I don't care what it is, but you have severed morality from the standard of human life. Suddenly, it's not human life that you're supporting. It's actually human life you are the enemy of. You've set morality in reverse, as Ayn Rand says. So what they call being moral is, in fact, an immoral approach to defending yourself. An immoral approach that must, down the line, kill more innocents and kill more of your side anyway, which is immoral. It is immoral to let one IDF soldier die because we're trying to protect so-called innocent Palestinian civilians. That would be immoral.
I want to get to one other paragraph from that article, and Daniel has posted the link. So I encourage people after the show is over, of course, to read the full article. And maybe at the end we can discuss Dr. Peikoff's appearance on Bill O'Reilly's show as well. But I do want to read some more super chats. So Gail says, "Thank you so much for your dedication to moral clarity, which only objectivism can explain." Thank you, and thank you also to Wes Stewart and to all our super chatters. You know, we like to end shows and also during shows promote our different membership levels and so on. And we haven't been doing it this past week. We haven't had any sponsored episodes this past week. I don't think it kind of fits the content at the moment, but that doesn't mean that you know, our financial needs are no longer you know, kind of put on pause. Yeah, our super chatters.
Razi, I'm just pulled in two directions. On the one hand, no, I can't. It's almost as though I'm not psychologically able. You know, I'm so appreciative of Quent Cordair Fine Arts, for example, and I love the art that they sell. But it's like I can't. It's almost as though I need it the most right now, but I don't have the spirit to look at it. And so I have to agree with you. I'm emotionally too torn to fully appreciate the great values in life like that. But we need them. The ironic paradox here is probably we need them more than ever in moments like this. An island, a moment where you remind yourself what life is really all about. But I'm not ready. I can't go there myself yet.
Yeah, you know, I second what you say about Quent Cordair Fine Art, and you know, this is also true of in different ways, true of other advertisers on the show. This is not the right time to do that, but as I mentioned, I was going to say how you know, how our audience has been particularly generous with super chats this past week. But as I was going to say that, we got another $50 super chat from Dunbar 102 saying, "Thank you, bringing reason, morality, and truth of those of us who find value in it. I hope you reach far and wide." That is another thing. Our content, is still not in the millions of views. We're working towards that, but it has been seen a bit more recently, I think, in the past week. And I will encourage once again people who think this is a good sort of contrast to the other sources that people hear on this topic, to please share it now more than ever, and of course like it and subscribe and engage in the live chat, in the comments. All that helps this content be viewed by more people. Pooja sends a super chat. "Thanks for celebrating Peikoff's birthday and ideas." Thank you for your support. And back to the article, I will read another paragraph, and James, then we will hear from you on this. Again, this is from October 2001. "Conservatives are equally responsible for today's crisis, as Reagan's record attests. Reagan not only failed to retaliate after 241 U.S. Marines in Lebanon were slaughtered, he did worse, holding that Islamic guerrillas were our ideological allies because of their fight against atheistic Soviets. He methodically poured money and expertise into Afghanistan. This put the U.S. wholesale into the business of creating terrorists. Most of them regarded fighting the Soviets as only the beginning. Our turn soon came." Yeah, this definitely,
Okay, that moment in history between Carter and Reagan is where so much of this deadly groundwork was laid. I think it was beginning, obviously, earlier. Obviously, in the late 60s and 70s, the wars in Israel, but the attack on the Israeli athletes in 1972 at the Munich Olympics, then in 1979, when the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran, they took the United States Embassy in a clear act of war and kidnapped our diplomatic personnel, holding them there for hundreds of days. The president did absolutely nothing. His completely ineffectual response was nothing but a sanction and a green light. But then the person who was supposed to be better, and in some ways, I guess with the Soviets, his policy was better. But when it came to Islamic, and this is an area where his anti-Soviet policy failed, because there he's supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Because why? They're anti-Soviet, as if Afghanistan was what the conflict with the Soviets would turn on. Dead wrong. And so he's funneling money to the Islamic extremists in Afghanistan, of all things. One of the most horrific memories of my life was the bombing of those the barracks in Lebanon, where all those Marines get killed by Islamic terrorists. And what does Reagan do? What does Reagan do? In effect, nothing. In effect, sanctioning all of this. Why? Because we're friends with Islamic extremists at this moment. Why? Because they're fighting those atheistic Russians for us. Ladies and gentlemen, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend. And just because they were the enemies of the atheistic Soviet Empire at the time did not make them good people. No, indeed. They were still the forces of mysticism, hatred of civilization, hatred of life that they are today. And what Carter did was bad in sanctioning the new nation of Iran, it seems to me that what Reagan did was even worse, He is increasing the funding for these Islamic extremists simply because they were enemies of the Soviet Union, laying the groundwork for Islamic terror rule forever in Afghanistan, frankly, and sanctioning the Iranian puppets in Lebanon. No, what Ronald Reagan did here was so horrific and really did help lay the groundwork for all that came. And then, of course, in the next decade, Bill Clinton. He's actually attacked. There's the first attack on the World Trade Center in the early 90s, the attack on the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy ship. Islamic extremists were attacking directly American interests. And what did Bill Clinton do? Nothing. absolutely nothing, turning the other cheek again and again like a good altruist, so that what we have here in the late 20th century are presidents Carter, Reagan, and Clinton, who completely set up what anyone with eyes in their head would see would be inevitable. Another egregious, aggressive attack by these Islamic monsters. And who do they go for? Not military targets on 9/11. They go for innocent civilians. They go for innocent civilians, slaughtering thousands of innocent civilians on September 11th. So here we are, more than 20 years later. Innocent civilians, once more by these Islamic savages, are being targeted, and there's no moral clarity coming from the leaders of the West.
Yeah, and Clinton famously had an opportunity to kill bin Laden and didn't do it because I think it was 200 civilians were likely to die in that attack. And so he didn't do that because he wanted to protect civilians, on the enemy side. And the result was thousands killed in the US. And again, every time something like this happens, and the greater the scale, the more you think, okay, maybe now this is the wake up call.
Maybe this time. No, I mean it. No. All they want to do is to destroy Western civilization. They will not be happy until every Jew is dead or removed from the area. They will not be happy until the great Satan, America, has fallen. Do not take them at their word, ladies and gentlemen. And when you see at 9/11, when you see what happened last weekend, that is the actual physical manifestation of their values, of their dream. That is what they want to do. They want to slaughter Jewish babies. They want to slaughter Americans.
Yeah, and it's
their word.
And actually, I'll read this super chat because I can tie it into what I was about to say. So Jeff Bannister says, "Happy birthday, Dr. Peikoff. Great content, ARCUK. The pro-Hamas protesters sicken me. They sicken me as well. We're going to be discussing them in detail, as I mentioned. But when you think, if anybody is tempted to think, yeah, this is horrible, but it's, over there in the Middle East, Israel is surrounded and so on. We're here oceans away from them. Look at the protests in London. Look them up. Look, again, I tweeted about it, but you can find more of it on Twitter. Look closely. Look at the protests in was it Sydney or somewhere in Australia?
Sydney, Australia, they're chanting gas the Jews.
Yeah.
You cannot tell me there isn't massive mental evasion that goes on. There's no one in the 21st century. If you find yourself in a crowd that's chanting gas the Jews, if you find yourself in a crowd where they're displaying swastikas openly, ladies and gentlemen, you're way past the time you need to check your premises. And I do not regard that as intellectually honest. I do not think that is possible. Maybe if you're a child, maybe if you're a young person who doesn't know better, but all you have to do is pick up a newspaper or read a book or get yourself slightly informed, and you realize, and there's plenty of information out there. I do not regard ignorance at that level in the 21st century by adults in a Western country as innocent. There's nothing innocent about it. When when you find yourself in a crowd saying, chanting, gas the Jews, or holding up swastikas like they were in New York City. My God, people, what state have we reached where that kind of behavior can even be morally sanctioned, much less to interview them sympathetically by media outlets? It's terrifying.
Yeah. And the left, of course, is particularly bad on this. They have been for many, many years. I think I don't want to say this because I don't agree with what Biden is saying. I think he should be much better on Israel, but he is better than any previous president when something like this happened, in the sense that he is sending those aircraft carriers. On the other hand, that rhetoric, I'm talking about his rhetoric up until now, has been better. But it is getting worse and worse. We are hearing talk about protecting civilians on the other side. And again, you have to understand what that means in this context. It's not that there are military bases and Israel is saying, no, let's go for the city. There are no military bases. There are only civilian. There's only civilian areas, which is where Hamas is hiding. So it is targeting those areas or just waving the white flag. Their
missile launchers are under private homes and kitchens. Their headquarters are under hospitals. That's what they do. That's how they operate. That's what the targets are. They have necessitated all of that. Now, the two enemies here are anyone who says, oh, fear of escalation. What? No, You know, you are looking at a sanctioner of evil the minute they say Israel or our side needs to worry about fear of escalation. No, no. Fear of escalation is what we need to induce in the other side. It is not Israel that need, and this is the other code phrase, restraint. They need to show restraint in their response. No, 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 no. Whenever you hear people talk using language, and I'm generous in calling it language, letting that kind of noise come out of their mouth, Israel has to show restraint, or we have to be worried about, quote, escalation. Those are the people sanctioning the evil that happened. Those are the people tying the hands of those who are who would give us the response that we need, anything like the response that we need to this horror. So identify the enemy, not by, because the enemy won't be obvious and say, hey, I'm pro-Iran, or hey, I'm pro-Hezbollah. No, they won't say that, but they'll say Israel or America has to show restraint. We have to, or we have to worry about fear of escalation. No, 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 no. That is, those words are the advocacy for these violent thugs.
Yeah. By the way, one of the people who did that was, Russia introduced a Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire. Yeah, it's Russia who we need to hear from on war and who's right and wrong. I think if Russia supports what you do, that's a very good time to question whether you're on the right side or not.
Oh, no, we should get the hell out of the United Nations. The United States is sanctioning of the United Nations at this, well, it's been known for decades how it's been sanctioning. The United Nations has been sanctioning the most evil regimes on this planet. And when it comes to Israel and sanctioning Islamic violence, they are active supporters of it. Active supporters of it. And the United Nations is an agent of evil. I'm going to say this loud and clear so that everyone can understand. The United Nations helped kill babies last weekend. The United Nations, through its decades of policy against Israel, helped kill babies last weekend. For us to continue, for the United States or any other civilized nation to be part of the United Nations is to sanction evil, is to help the murder of babies. And I'm going to be that simple and clear about it.
Yeah, by the way, it's not just in terms of what they vote for in the Security Council or certainly in the General Assembly. So one thing that I forgot to put in our news bulletin at the start was the IDF released a conversation between somebody in the IDF and a Palestinian in Gaza trying to go south away from the area that Israel said that people should leave. And he said they were being blocked by Hamas, and he was asked where, and they said next to the UNRWA headquarters. Of course, that's the UN mission to Gaza, and that's not the first time that kind of stuff happens. The UN mission to Lebanon has to the south of Lebanon. They're supposed to be peacekeepers. They're always on the side, actively helping the people who are the cause of war. So the UN is absolutely not a good organization, and I completely agree with you. We should leave them. We should leave that organization. We should have a long time ago. And if nations want to have some sort of organization where everybody has some sort of conversation with each other, how about you keep out some of those countries that we shouldn't be dealing with anyway, and have some alliance,
including Iran and Russia. We shouldn't be involved in the organ. Ipso facto, by that very inclusion of such evil nations, we should not be participating. All we're doing is sanctioning violence. That's all we're doing.
Yeah. So just to, as we wrap up, James, let's talk about that interview that Dr. Peikoff did with Bill O'Reilly. It was on Bill O'Reilly's show. This was also shortly after 9/11. I don't remember when exactly, and it's been a while since I've watched it, but I've watched it several times. I think that interview kind of shows how long distance we have to go before we have the kind of impact in the culture that we would like, because I think everything Peikoff said there made sense. O'Reilly, often used to refer to him as a centrist, but he was on Fox News. You would think on this is one of the issues where Fox News would be somewhat better than the rest. And yet the idea of treating this as a full-on war that we have to win in the same way that the U.S. And the Allies won the war against Nazi Germany and against Japan. That idea was considered crazy, basically, by O'Reilly when Peikoff.
O'Reilly is considered a conservative. Now he calls himself a moderate. He went to the Kennedy School and so forth. But there's nothing. He's a traditional religious conservative, and there's no really other way to put it. And he had the top-rated cable news show in America at the time, and it was Fox News, again, the leading journalistic voice on television in America for the conservatives. So this reflects Bill O'Reilly at the time reflected mainstream conservative or mainstream Republican thought, and I saw it live when it happened, and Bill O'Reilly treated the simple sense that would have prevented these murders. The simple sense that would have prevented the murders we had last weekend, he treated that as utterly insane, utterly insane. And Dr. Peikoff said things that were controversial, no doubt about it. For example, Leonard Peikoff did not take nuclear weapons off the agenda when it came to taking out Iran. He said, "I'm no military expert, but I wouldn't. Why on earth would you take out the possibility of using nuclear weapons and tell your enemy that? That makes absolutely no sense." In fact, talking about a moral way of doing war, a moral way of doing war is not to worry about their casualties. No, the opposite. You want to end the war quickly. You want to end it with as quickly as possible with the minimum number of casualties on your side. And if that means using the most effective weapons that you have. And so Leonard Peikoff refused to take nuclear weapons off the agenda, and Bill O'Reilly thought he was absolutely crazy and a monster for doing so. But of course, that would be the correct approach. By whatever means necessary, we take out nation states that sponsor these kind of horrific atrocities, or we're begging for more atrocities.
Yeah, by the way,
O'Reilly helped. Now, I'm going to say it again. This is not just the UN. Bill O'Reilly, in criticizing Leonard Peikoff at that moment, who was being prophetic at that moment, is in fact helping to sanction the situation that led to last weekend.
And by the way, in that article, End States Who Sponsor Terrorism, Peikoff mentions that at the time, Rumsfeld, the defense secretary, refused to rule out the use of nuclear weapons. Now, I guess they considered it, and then they decided to drop food and medicine instead, but maybe it was a close call. But yeah, between when Peikoff wrote that and the military operation actually started, unfortunately, things changed. There was a super chat I missed. I will get back to in a second. But James, any final thoughts on either Peikoff's appearance on O'Reilly, which Daniel, if you can find it, I don't think I sent you the link, but if you can find it and post a link, that would be great. Otherwise, people can find it easily on YouTube. Yeah. Any last comments on this or anything else to do with what we're discussing today?
Well, Leonard Peikoff, as I said at the beginning, would be very proud of those of us who call ourselves students of objectivism in what we're doing right now, and the moral clarity, because we are the only ones that really have moral clarity. And if I have any moral clarity on this point, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants like Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff. They both came from ethnically Jewish backgrounds, but neither of them really identified in any sort of ethnic way with any ethnicity. They were not religious. They were not. They were the opposite of racists. They were ultimate individualists. It is not because of their Jewish background that Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff were fierce defenders of Israel. It was because they are defenders of civilization. And I want to ask everyone out there, atheist or Christian, if you're a Christian, I want you to question this turn the other cheek, love your enemy business, which is so hobbled our response. That would be my response. But I would also ask you, whatever your beliefs are, ladies and gentlemen, it is civilization that is on the edge here. It is civilization that is being attacked here. It is, as Dr. Peikoff said, it is the forces of the worst kind of dark age mysticism and life hatred versus civilization itself. That's what is at stake here. People always will say, you know, Israel is a Jewish state and it's got all its own problems. That's not the issue. That is not the issue, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to say to everyone in North America, whatever your ethnic or religious background on this is a question of civilization. This is a question of mystic savages who hate life and will kill babies and torture people. And that's their point, versus people who love life. It's really that stark and that simple. And Peikoff was regarded as an Ayn Rand when she said things like this on the Donahue program about Islamists back in the 70s. They were regarded as insane, lunatics, warmongers, you name it. But if they had been heeded, there would be babies still alive today. I have no other clear way of putting it. But they were the ones who were sounding the siren song. There is no question in my mind, if Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff had been heeded, we would not have had 9/11, and we certainly wouldn't have had this horror last weekend.
Yeah.
And think about the future babies, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Think about all the future babies. How about that?
And the nature and scope of the threat is, again, that is the reason why we are doing this now every day. You know, I'm sure our viewers miss our regular content. So do I. But yeah, this is not just, you know, Razi is originally from Israel, so of course, I do care a lot about Israel. You know, there are people I care about who are in harm's way now, but it is more than that. I worry for my own safety here in London. I worry for where we are headed. You know, we started the Ayn Rand Center UK to actively help make the world a better place, the kind of world we would be, you know, happy to live in. I mean, we're happy to live in this world, but if it was better, we'd be happier. I really think there's a threat here that things will get much worse, and we're going to do whatever we can to prevent it and to fight against it. So again, thank you, James. Thank you to our viewers and our super chatters. We have a few more. Bonnie, Rob, and Stephen, thank you all for the super chats. And there was a super chat I missed before. Anne asks, are you visiting with Dr. Peikoff later today? That is not a question for me, I'm guessing, because I'm in London. James, that is for you.
I have no such plans. Dr. Peikoff is very, very much retired, and but he's from what I understand, he's still engaged in life as much as possible. I'm sure he's horrified at the news of what's happened, but I have not spoken to him in the last couple of weeks, so I can't give you any updates on that, and I don't plan on seeing him today. But I know, Razi, he would agree with with your courageous and morally clear leadership of Ayn Rand Center UK.
Well, I appreciate that. I will once again encourage people to share this not just on social media and so on. If you have any otherwise reasonable friends or acquaintances who are not fully clear on this issue, if there's anything, either this show right now or any other show that we've done over the past week that we will do in the coming days and weeks, then please do share that. It does help. So thanks again, everybody, for watching. Thank you, James. Happy birthday, Dr. Peikoff. We will celebrate it more appropriately in coming birthdays in the next few years. Thanks, and see you back here tomorrow.